What's going on, guys? Robert Teacher News, and I'm here with a review video of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And for those who are relatively new here, I did a 4-player co-op with my mods and my best friends, Tiny Tina, Mr. Barnes, 1988, and Average Gaming 017. And so the full playthrough of that is actually already on the channel. It is also over in my Twitch VODs as well, if you would like to go check it out. It was definitely a really fun time. Definitely a long set of streams if you would like to. But of course, we're going to talk about my honest thoughts on the game. And everything that has come about due to that playthrough. Of course, I will not be showing footage in this video. It is literally just going to be me on the screen. There will be some text appearing on the right-hand side in due course, but in order to keep spoilers to a minimum, I will be mentioning names of Pokemon, I will be mentioning names of characters, and certain events in this particular review, but I will be breaking the review down into sections. Some of the sections will contain spoilers, of course, if you are playing the game after Christmas, because I'm recording this just before Christmas. But in order to review the game, I will be breaking this down into separate sections, so if there are certain sections you don't want to watch because you don't want to get spoiled on anything, I recommend you just skip to the next chapter. So let's break the game down into sections. We're going to be looking at the performance of the game, the elephant in the room, everybody's been talking about it, the visuals of the game, the gameplay itself, the new Pokemon, on which I felt like was really strong, the region itself, the characters in the game, the story, and the post-game. Obviously, I will be mentioning some names of the new Pokemon as well as some of the characters, so if that's where you don't want to be spoiled on, as well as some of the story elements, those would be the sections I recommend and skipping past. But let's get on with it. So starting off with the performance of the game, it goes without saying at this point, this is the worst optimized game that Pokemon has ever released. There are lots of glitches, there are a lot of bugs, there's the inconsistent frame rate issue that has plagued the last 3 titles that Game Freak themselves have released, namely Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and now Scarlet and Violet. It's quite disappointing to see that, and I will say this now, I make no apologies to Game Freak for this. I'm not going to make the excuses, oh, they didn't have enough time. I personally think there's a lot more to it than just lack of time. I do think lack of time is definitely an issue, but at this point we've had 3 separate releases that all have the same problem, and this is probably the worst. It does not look good when some of the characters are moving at like 5 frames per second. There is no real draw distance in the game either, so anything further away definitely renders very poorly. And it does cause a lot of issues. Now, one thing that is also worth pointing out is a lot of people during their time playing this game actually experience crashes. I personally did not experience any crashes on my Violet copy. I did experience one playing Scarlet, interestingly enough, but my playthrough partners definitely did experience a lot of these performance issues. So, honestly, if you are worried about crashes or anything like that, one thing I would recommend doing is saving every hour or so and then restarting the game, and that generally stops a lot of the problems. The other thing that really bothered me in particular was the movement between cutscene and gameplay. Any instance where you had like a white or a black screen as you're loading into the next part can sometimes load like 1 or 2 minutes instead of the few seconds that it should be taking, which definitely led to me worried about the game crashing. It didn't, it just was very, very slow loading. So performance definitely poor, and quite frankly inexcusable. I have to say it, I make no apologies to Game Freak. I'm certainly not going to be a Game Freak apologist. At this point, we're at the end of 2022 right now. There's no excuses to not be able to make a game for a Switch. The Switch has been around for a long time now. You know the capabilities of the Switch, so make a game that actually runs cleanly. If other franchises can do it, so can Pokemon. That's my take on that. But let's move on to visuals. So, visuals of the game. This game, honestly, looks brilliant. The open world feel looks really awesome. The routes themselves, the map itself is very expansive, and there are lots of different biomes in it, and it's not a linear pathway either. So there's lots of really cool areas to explore. There's lots of really well-textured mountains and things like that. Visually, it looks great. The Pokemon models, to me, are the standouts. especially with the fur, Pokemon scales, any feathers, even like metallic elements like Magnemite and things like that. They actually look hella metallic. These are probably the best Pokemon models that they've ever released. A lot of people talk about new Pokemon Snap, but I think this one is actually much better. Every area looks really natural. There's a lot of twists and turns everywhere, which is really nice. It definitely gives a lot of open world exploration feel to it. I really like as well that the Pokemon in the overworld can appear in like family groups, so sometimes you might get baby forms with an evolution in it, so you get Pokemon in the trees, Pokemon in the sky, Pokemon swimming underwater, things like that, and it looks really natural in the way that it's presented. Definitely feels really, really clean, and I'm definitely a huge fan of that. I think this is a big step forward for Pokemon. It's definitely the closest look to a natural-looking Pokemon game that we've had. I think the other big standout is the character animations in the cutscenes. They look phenomenal, especially in the climax of the No Way Home story, which we will get to further down. But they really did make some of the characters look a lot more believable. They certainly give you a lot of personality. I'm a particular fan of Iono. We'll get to that in a little bit later on when we look at the characters. But the biggest fail to me is character customization. You actually do get to customize your character right from the get-go, but the options are limited. I do appreciate the gender-neutral shift, however, which is very nice. I am very grateful to Pokemon for being a lot more inclusive. But the biggest problem is you are basically tied to using some form of your school uniform, and you can't move away from that, which is in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the fact that you can get accessories that don't really fit, like a motorcycle helmet, for example, which is just bizarre. You certainly don't wear a motorcycle helmet for school uniform or whatever. That, to me, is a little bit of a bummer. I think that definitely could have been a massive area of improvement. I also didn't like the fact that you couldn't choose to wear glasses straight away. Come on, Pokemon, like, people wear glasses, man. Why you gotta limit that option, of all things? But yeah, visually, like, the Pokemon models look amazing. Some of the character models look amazing itself. I do actually like the look and feel of the overworld. But there is one other issue with regards to the visuals, and that to me is the towns. The towns look brilliant, especially Mesagoza, the kind of first major city you go to. Looks brilliant, definitely well built up, but there is a problem. And it is going to be talked about more in the gameplay section, but there is a lot of issues with just some of the aesthetics that can make it feel a little bit immersion breaking. But those are few and far between. So let's move on to gameplay. Alright, so moving on to gameplay, this has probably one of my biggest bugbears in the entire franchise, and that is the tutorial. The early game tutorial is far, far too long. It took me about 20 minutes during my first stream to play past the tutorial stage, just so I could actually trade my starter over onto my main playthrough game, obviously for the Dex reason. For those who are new around here or who perhaps don't know, I actually have a tradition where my first playthrough, I have all 3 starters on the first copy so I can get to experience them. But the tutorial took about 20 minutes, and that was when I was mashing A on like fastest text option, and part of that is due to one of the early parts of the plot when you first meet your legendary ride Pokemon, Koraidon or Miraidon, whichever one you are using. There's a cave that it goes through where it moves incredibly slowly and not very effective, which could really cause a lot of issues. So the tutorial, far too long, probably the longest I think Pokemon has ever done. And that kind of sucked. But once you actually get past the tutorial, the gameplay itself is actually really fun. The fact that you get the legendary ride Pokemon pretty early makes exploration a lot simpler. It's definitely a lot more fun. The new auto battle feature that came in was pretty nice. Not my favorite. There are some limitations to it that I kind of wish was not the case, because when you auto battle, Pokemon don't actually learn moves, or they don't evolve when they level up, which is a little bit unfortunate. I feel like they could have just left that in, because it would have made It would have made actually doing outbreaks and training things a little bit more worth it, because the experience you actually gain from auto battles is like massively cut down. So you actually get way less experience just for using the Let's Go feature than you would if you just battled them one by one in a regular basis, which definitely sucked a little bit. The button configuration is also a little bit different from previous games, so I found myself repeatedly pressing the wrong buttons, loading up the wrong menus that I didn't particularly want because I was not used to the button configuration. I still do that even now after I've finished the playthrough, and I sometimes play a little bit off stream just for a little bit of fun. So that kind of is a little bit annoying. So if you are not used to different button configurations, this one might be a bit of a funky one for you. The other thing that is a bit of a slight shame is the minimap. The minimap is a nice addition. It definitely helps. But it does have a fundamental flaw, and that is the default setting for the map is very wonky because it basically moves to face the direction that you're in. So a huge recommendation for you is when you get the option to open up the map menu, I highly recommend opening it up and then pressing down R3, which is just push down on your right analog stick. The reason you do that is because that will make the map always orientate so north is at the top, regardless of which direction you're facing. It makes navigating the map a lot easier, so I highly recommend doing that when you get the opportunity to. A nice little change to the gameplay was the trainer battles being optional. It is definitely worth fighting them, however, as you do get rewards for battling a set number of trainers along the route. Some actually really good TMs are hidden behind those, Earthquake being one of them. So I highly recommend doing it when you get the chance, but you don't have to do it straight away. You can do that at whatever pace you want. And it's really nice that the game chose to work 3 different stories. And you can pretty much do them however you want to do them, which is a very, very nice touch. The traditional gym challenge is still there. It is very much what you expect. Do a gym test or a gym puzzle, whatever, and then take on the gym leader, which was nice, relatively standard. The Team Star challenge was very, very tough. The bosses especially were really interesting, but I do like the gameplay involved with it. The Path of Legends was much less gameplay heavy, a lot more story orientated, but definitely a nice addition. The one thing that people are constantly talking about is level scaling. People are saying that there's no level scaling. That is not actually factually correct. There's no dynamic level scaling is what they should say. It's very static level scaling, so there is intended quote-unquote order for you to play the game in if you want to play the story with the standard level scaling thing that we come to know from Pokemon. That being said, though, a lot of people complaining that they don't scale up to your team. I actually don't necessarily mind that, because what would happen if they did scale to your team is that they would have teams that they wouldn't necessarily have, and that would also make the rematching in the post-game very awkward to deal with as well. Terrestrialization, the new mechanic in the game, is really well implemented. I have to say, I was not expecting it to be as balanced as it is, but it is actually pretty balanced, and it is pretty enjoyable, and I've kind of grown to like how the models look when they're terrestrialized. I thought it looked a bit stupid at first, but I actually started to like it. The Terra raids, however, are not the greatest, especially public ones. Sometimes joining them because the online communications are really poor. In fact, they're even worse in this game, I have to say. Sometimes you end up not connecting to the raids. It sometimes takes a minute or two to actually load, only for it to fail. And then you have to literally wait for the button to be able to refresh the list to be active before you can actually refresh the list again. You should honestly just be able to refresh it whenever you want to. I feel like it's a little bit stupid that you're made to wait, but that kind of sucks. But if you are doing raids with your friends via co-op, the Union Circle is quite nice, I have to say. I do like the Union Circle. But is a bit of a problem with it. So when you join the Union Circle, you can only trade or join raids with other people in that Union Circle, which is pretty dumb for trading, to be honest, because trading with a link code should be able to done with anyone else who presses that link code and not be limited to people in the Union Circle. That's a little bit dumb. However, the Union Circle does have one major benefit, and that is the fact that if you have someone who is on Pokemon Scarlet, like myself during our playthrough, and Scarlet was Mr. Barnes, and I was on Violet, you can actually get the other players' version exclusives appearing in your world. So essentially the way it works is you transport yourself into the other person's world, so then you get to see the Pokemon they get to see, which is really, really nice when you're hunting down the Paradox Pokemon in Area 0. Definitely worth it. And to do. That is a welcome change. We haven't had that at all in the games before. This does make it a lot easier to get all the version exclusives throughout the game, depending on, of course, if you have a friend to play it with. Alright, the next thing that people often talk about is TMs. TMs are back to one-time use this game. However, with the crafting that is now in the game, once you have actually picked up the TM, you can make it as many times as you want, providing you have the materials that you need by knocking out particular Pokemon in order to get the materials that you actually want from it. So it might suck, but you can actually just relearn the TMs or just recraft the TMs. Another thing that is really nice is that Pokemon can actually relearn moves that they've already learned. This includes TMs, so if you have taught Earthquake to a Pokemon and then you've taken it off, if you then go to the Pokemon summary, go to their move page, and then you can actually check for moves, they actually can just learn Earthquake again. You don't need to recraft the TM for it, which is a nice change. The TMs have been handled pretty well. Obviously, there are people that have been complaining that it should be multi-use, but with the way they've handled it, I think they've handled it very nicely. The newest feature as well, that is a nice touch to the gameplay, is the picnics. We had, of course, Pokemon Camp in Sword and Shield, which had some nice, interesting things, but picnics now have got a lot more features in it, especially with the sandwich feature. The sandwich feature gives you a lot of different buffs to a lot of different things, including things like encounters, shiny chance, encountering specific types of Pokemon, as well as egg hatching, because the other feature of picnics is now the breeding has been moved into the picnics as opposed to using a daycare system, which is nice because you can get sandwich buffs to actually increase your egg hatching power. But there is a bit of a small downside to it, is that actually now any egg that hatches that you pick out of the picnic basket is actually automatically put into your boxes now. It's not put into your party anymore, which might suck for some players who want to breed a little bit quicker. But there is another cool change to the breeding feature, is that if you have multiple Dittos, and you want to breed multiple different Pokemon, you can actually do that now. It actually turns out, and Austin John Plays actually tested this, that if you have 3 separate Dittos and 3 separate Pokemon that you want to breed, you actually get a considerable amount of eggs using a sandwich in a half-hour period, which is actually crazy. So you can actually breed really, really quickly, which is really good for shiny hunting, especially if you are using the pseudo method, which is still a thing. I'm not much of a shiny hunter myself, I will be honest, but it is a nice touch for shiny hunters. It is a little bit slower. One other thing that would be nice is mass release options. There is no mass release in this game, sadly. That feature was, of course, used in Legends Arceus, but the game was kind of built around catching multiple of the same Pokemon, so it makes sense for that game. Unfortunately, no mass release in this game, which sucks. I personally would like to see it. But nonetheless, the gameplay is a pretty fun experience. I have enjoyed running around and playing the game itself. So let's move on to the region. Alright then, so moving on to the region itself. Paldea is a very, very huge and expansive map. There are lots of different biomes in it, which can make it a very, very diverse area to explore. There is a few little things that I'm kind of a little bit sad about. There's not that many caves up in the main overworld. That does change with Area 0, which is a nice touch. I think Area 0 is probably one of the best features of the actual region itself. I think it's a really cool region. And the fact that it is entirely open and that you can actually explore the entire region right from the very get-go is pretty nice. Each different area hosts a wide range of Pokemon in it, so you're not necessarily getting all of the Early game Pokemon appearing all over the map. That, in fact, is actually not the case. Most of the time, the early Pokemon actually only appear in the early parts of the game, which is right down at the south. The settlements, the towns themselves, are pretty well laid out. They actually do look realistic towards towns. But as I mentioned with the visuals part earlier, the vast majority of these houses you actually can't get into. Unfortunately, most of the buildings are for aesthetic purposes, which in my opinion kind of sucks, because we've had games where we can go into these buildings, and usually there's like a point of interest for lore theorists and stuff like that. That's usually a nice thing. But the problem with it is that most of the NPCs don't really have anything interesting to say. You don't have to necessarily even talk to them. And a lot of the buildings themselves you can't go into. And the things that you can access, things like the shops, don't actually have any interiors in them. This is the exception with the customization salon, which you can actually go into, kind of similar to how they were in, I believe, Sword and Shield. Might actually have been in Sun and Moon, I'm thinking of. But yeah, it's kind of a bit of a shame. But the region is very wide. There's a lot of things crammed in it. A lot of Pokemon actually in it. Lots of different areas, which is really nice. Definitely fun to explore. And I definitely do enjoy the region as a whole. But I would like to be able to actually go into the buildings. I feel like that's a bit of a missed opportunity. It's kind of a bit sad, especially with Masagoza, when you've got this massive, great big city with all of these roads in it, and the only thing you can actually access are the academy itself and some shops. I would like there to be been a little bit more in there, but that doesn't take away from my actual experience playing the game. I do enjoy the regions as a whole. I've enjoyed exploring the region, and I continue to do so even to this day. But let's go to move on from the region to the Pokemon itself. Alright then, so let's move on to the new Pokemon. So now at this point, we will be moving into more spoiler territory. So if you don't want to listen to any names of Pokemon or anything like that that have not been officially revealed, now will be the time to click off the video. But thank you all so much for watching. But for those who have already played the game or want to continue, there are 103 new Pokemon in this game, which is a pretty expansive amount of Pokemon. We haven't seen that many new Pokemon added in for a while. Pokemon from previous games got regional evolutions. I'm a huge fan of Annihilate, actually. That mon is incredible. I'm very happy with it. Its signature move is absolutely busted. I like all three of the starters, I have to say. We didn't get to see the starter evolutions in the trailer, and I'm kind of glad we didn't. I actually really enjoy their evolutions, which is unusual for me. Usually one starter tends to get shafted, in my opinion, tends to look considerably worse than the others, but I actually think all three of them are really cool. I think if you have any starter in mind that you want to pick and you don't know what it evolves into, I don't think you'll be disappointed whichever one you pick. One thing that is worth noting about this game is that some new design philosophies, which is kind of traditional every sort of 5 generations or so, have come in. So some of the Pokemon do look a little bit weird. Some of them don't look like the Pokemon that we've become used to. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to appreciate some of these Pokemon than they would normally. The Paradox Pokemon, things like Iron Treads and Great Tusk that we saw in the trailer, very interesting concepts, some of them pretty well executed. The past kind of Paradox Pokemon are sort of more feral looking versions of their modern counterparts, whereas the future ones are kind of like this animatronic type robot style, which can be a little bit jarring for some people, especially the future ones. Definitely don't tend to look that great. Regional variants wise, we didn't actually get that many this game. We did, of course, see Paldea and Wooper be revealed in the trailer. Also, Paldea and Tauros, for some reason, got 3 regional variants in this game, with basically being the same Pokemon with different markings and have different typings. So there is just a regular fighting type, which is the main one, as well as a firefighting and a water fighting type, which is cool. But a little bit weird to see Tauros just getting 3 different forms. But we did also get Convergent Evolution in this game. We did see Wiglet in the trailer. There's also Toadskull, which is another regional or a Convergent Evolution. We didn't actually get that many, which I'm a little surprised by. We've usually seen a handful of regional variants, and I would have liked to have seen Convergent Evolution explored a little bit more. Excuse me. The legendary Pokemon, really, really cool. The legendary Quartet. Pretty interesting designs. They are based on Chinese mythology, which is pretty interesting. One of them, Chi Yu, I can't really get to grips with its design. It's very, very strong competitively, but in terms of its design, I don't know, I don't get on with it too well. The others I do quite like the most, though. The biggest thing about the regional decks that kind of sucks for me is that all of my playthrough partners, including myself, did not actually get their mascots. There was no Rabumbi for me, there was no Snorlax for Barnes, there was no Snowball Iron for Tina, and there was no Aggron for Average, which, you know, a little bit sad, but, you know, DLC may fix that. There are, like, several bee-fly species native to Spain, so definitely doesn't make sense that Rabumbi's not in the game, but you know what? It's totally fine. It is all good. People have beamed on me for that, but I'm not changing my name anytime soon. But in terms of the roster, is it the best Pokedex in the world? No. Not really. I definitely kind of like Sword and Shield's decks a little bit more. But I do like most of the new Pokemon, but there are some that are absolute stinkers. I will actually make a tier list video of all the Pokemon in the game at some point, so look out for that on the channel. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, so you can catch up with that one. But most of the new Pokemon are pretty cool. I do like some of them more than others, but I think I can get down with the vast majority of these Pokemon. But let's move on to the characters. So I'd say when it comes to the characters, the vast majority of these are certainly above average, especially design-wise, visually. I like the vast majority of the characters in the game. The trainer NPCs are actually different throughout the map, despite having the same trainer class, which the vast majority of them are students, which is a nice change. It does actually make it very difficult to know what Pokemon they're going to have, because usually you can... And in previous titles, you can actually determine what sort of Pokemon they're going to have by their trainer class. That is not actually the case now. The Academy staff, their designs looked amazing. I'm a huge fan of Rhyhorn. I think the history teacher is actually a really well-executed character. Dendra as the battle trainer is really cool. I definitely like her idle animation during the battles. I definitely love doing the classes in the school and learning much more about their personalities and things like that. The gym leaders themselves, they were interesting design-wise, but a lot of them felt lacking in personality, which is kind of typical of Pokemon games. Most of the characters generally don't have personality, but that is an improvement in this game with certain characters. I think Rhyme and Iono, probably my two favorite personalities when it comes to the gym leaders, but unfortunately the gym leaders barely contributed much to the story other than the necessary fights for the traditional gym challenge storyline. The Elite Four, honestly, pretty underwhelming. Gotta be honest, the characters themselves, not particularly great. Rika is a fan favorite. People seem to like Rika for some reason. I'm not a huge fan of Rika, gotta be honest. Same with Larry as well, who's also one of the gym leaders. He is just a very basic character. I'm not much of a fan of him. Everyone seems to love him for some reason. I don't really understand it myself. Gita as a champion, very underwhelming. Her team is pretty lackluster, gotta be honest. Also, the fight is in completely the wrong order. Definitely sucks for a champion. I think probably one of the weakest champions we've had in a while. But her actual design looks really cool, though. And she's got quite a nice presence. I do think her character's pretty well built. It's just unfortunate that her team sucks. Nimona as a rival. Not really a rival, to be honest. She's a really nice character. I do like how she's executed. But you're kind of not really a rival to her because you're basically playing the gym challenge to catch up to her. Basically, the premise is she's already a champion-ranked trainer, and your goal with the gym challenge is to become a champion-ranked trainer yourself. So it feels a little bit odd, not the greatest presence in the world, and also she does get a little bit annoying because she is very battle hungry. She loves battles all the time. She's obsessed, very much like Ash from the anime. But then again, she just runs up to you during some of the gym challenges. It's like, hey, let's battle before the gym, and then just says not today and pieces out, which is pretty annoying because you definitely like having rivals that actually want to fight you. But that kind of leads to the thing that I don't really feel like she's a rival. She's a cool character, though. Team Star, not really an evil team. I do want to make it clear there's not really an evil team in this game per se. But the Star Bosses and Poppy, probably my favorite characters in the game. To be Poppy, I mean Penny rather, not Poppy. Poppy was what I named my Tinkaton. But yeah, Penny definitely one of the most interesting characters. She's kind of quirky, kind of interesting, but actually she really cares about her friends, which are the Star Bosses. Essentially, the Star Bosses are very unique designs. They have very unique personalities. And also the fights were pretty scary too, especially with the Starmobiles. Penny's development was a little bit obvious, but she was pretty well made, I think, in general. But yeah, having Team Star Bosses kind of being like the former gang of people that were just getting bullied all the time, so they left to take action against the bullies, which is a failure of the Academy's part, which definitely makes Clavel a really interesting character because he really cares about all the students and stuff like that. So part of his endgame story is to kind of reunite them and actually use the star bases as academies, which is a really nice touch. Path of Legends with Arvin. Arvin is a very well executed character. I have to say, to be fair and balanced, I think he is probably the best written character with his story and his development. It's definitely very well executed. But my biggest problem with him is I didn't like the bullshit attitude when you first met him, as well as the attitude during Area Zero, which I definitely hated. I didn't really like Arvin's personality all that much, but in terms of his development, it's actually good to see a very well-developed character in Pokemon. We don't see too many of them, so it's a nice touch. The professors themselves, they were amazing. You didn't tend to see too much of them during the playthrough, but once you do the final story part, they were both very prevalent. They were really cool. Their story was very compelling. The plot twist with them was really nice. But the actual plot twist itself did not make sense for Sada, and we'll talk more about that in the story part. But it definitely made perfect sense for Turo. It seemed like they wrote the story with Turo in mind, and then kind of forgot they had to change it a little bit for Sada. But either way, both professors look brilliant. Their actual role in the game is quite nice too. But let's move on to the story. Alright then, so moving on to the stories of the game. We did talk briefly a little bit about this during the gameplay, but to go further through, there were 3 separate main stories and 1 story that was unlocked after you completed them all. We had the traditional gym challenge, which was pretty boring, gotta be honest with you. The gym tests were very rudimentary. Some of them were just plain boring. You know, finding a bunch of Sunflora as a fact quest, rolling an olive around a track, things like that. Pretty boring, gotta be honest. They weren't very exciting. I would have just preferred having just battle the trainers, and then once you beat the trainers, you get to face the gym leader, but we didn't get that. Also, with the gym leaders themselves, the rematches in the post-game were a pretty okay touch, but to be honest, by the time you've done most of the stories, you're like way over-leveled for the gym leader rematches. So they were basically only there as kind of like a way to unlock some of the post-game, but the story was actually quite interesting. We did get to learn a bit more about the motivations for the gym leaders, but to be honest, the gym challenge probably the least kind of exciting part of the actual game itself. But then again, that's the part of the story that we all expect because that's in every single Pokemon game. However, Starfall Street, definitely the most interesting, in my opinion. Lots of people hated them because they didn't really connect with the characters themselves, but actually I felt like while the Starfall Street was very plot heavy, we definitely got a lot more information on Team Star. They were basically like a bullied brotherhood who took action against their aggressors. But I did actually kind of like the format for taking these guys on. You basically had to use the new auto battle feature to knock out the Grunt's Pokemon, and then after defeating 30 of those, you then get to face the boss, and the boss was actually really challenging because they had a pretty compelling team themselves, and then you had to face the Starmobile characters, and my word, those things were absolutely insanely powerful. They definitely made Starfall Street a lot more interesting to do. The story of Clive and Cassiopeia, I put them both in inverted commas as the kind of mystery about them. Those characters were very obvious. The game literally spelled it out for you, but their plights made a lot of sense, and they weren't actually supposed to be taken seriously, a lot of people kind of review this game took those characters far too seriously itself. But I did actually really like the actual story, and I definitely enjoyed the Penny fight at the end and a little part of story that you get to experience throughout the end. I think it ended really well. I definitely loved each of the individual bosses' unique characters. It made a lot of sense to me. The Path of Legends, which is Arven's story, definitely a very minimally engaging story in terms of the actual gameplay. Basically, you go and fight several different Titan Pokemon, like Cloth, that were revealed in the trailer. These fights can be a little bit challenging, particularly the Dondozo at the end. The Tatsugiri Dondozo Titan was pretty scary. But Arven's story, pretty interesting. His resentment towards his parents. I say parents because, spoiler alert for those who didn't know, Arven is the son of either Professor Turo or Professor Sada, depending on which game you're playing. His story was relatively generic, but his motivations were pretty well developed throughout. His chase for the Herba Mystica to revive his very injured Mabosstiff, which is his partner Pokemon, was a really well executed story. It definitely executed even better in the final part of the story called The Way Home, which is where Arven finally meets his parents. Many don't consider this part post-game. I do consider it post-game just because you can't actually access it until you've beaten all three of the stories, including beating the champion. But the plot twist was pretty cool, with the professors actually being artificial AI that were created in the professor's place, as it were. They basically run Area Zero. The battles for both of them were extremely challenging. They basically used either the past Pokemon or the future Pokemon, depending on which game you played. Some of them you may not have even encountered, and some of them are hit like an absolute truck. But it definitely is the most incredible climax to a Pokemon game. Definitely probably one of the best bits of story we've seen executed in a while. I've generally not been too much of a fan of Pokemon stories for a long time. I think the last sort of post-game story, I'm going to refer to this as post-game story, that I actually really enjoyed was probably the Delta episode in ORAS. So it's been a long while since we've had like a really good gripping post-game. Even Sword and Shield's one, where we find out that Chairman Roses and Macrocosmos was actually the real evil team, wasn't really that exciting, to be honest with you. But yeah, essentially, that's all I have to say about the story. I think the Gym Challenge was boring. Starfall Street was probably my personal favorite of the three. Many people actually hate it. The Path of Legends was interesting. I definitely liked the story behind it, but it definitely lacked a climax until you got to The Way Home. But The Way Home is definitely one of the best story arcs that we've seen in a Pokemon game in a long time. But if we're not going to count The Way Home story as post-game, let's talk about the rest of the post-game as we move on to that final section. Alright then, so let's talk about post-game while we are at it, shall we? Honestly, if we're not going to count the Way Home story, that final bit of story as post-game, there's not really a lot to the post-game of this game in general. Aside from the Gym Leader rematches from the Gym Challenge itself, pretty mediocre, but the Academy Ace tournament at the end, which you need to unlock the really high-level raids, that was actually pretty nice, especially the music itself. Definitely really enjoyed the music itself. Actually completing the whole Pokedex of 400 felt pretty fun. There was a lot of really interesting hunts. There are certain Pokemon that were pretty hard to find, but they were really fun exploring the region, which I definitely enjoyed. But there are certain other post-game activities that most people like. Shiny hunting, I feel like, once again, I've not been a huge fan of shiny hunting for the main reason that there's not a lot of skill involved in finding a shiny Pokemon, which definitely sucks. We did have Dynamax Adventures come in DLC for Sword and Shield, so hopefully something like that does come back, because they were a little bit more expressive, would be more interesting for somebody like me. But one major step back to me about post-game is breeding. Obviously, breeding in the Picnic is nice, but the one biggest issue I have with breeding for competitive Pokemon is you cannot breed down Terra types. And that sucks, because a lot of Pokemon have very specific Terra types that they use really well, and they are often not their primary types. But breeding for Terra types can only be bred with their own types. So any Pokemon that is single type will always breed a Terra type of that particular type. Any Pokemon that is dual type will breed either one of those, which definitely sucks because the only way you can actually change Terra type is through getting 50 Terra shards, which is actually currently really, really hard to get unless you spam a bunch of raids of a particular type, which can take forever to do, which definitely sucks. So the post-game is lacking in terms of overall content, but hopefully we are widely expected to get DLC. And there is actually a massive section in the northeast of the map that is basically completely like grayed out effectively, or like shaded out, which is usually a pretty good indicator. We had the same deal with Sword and Shield where this happened, that there's probably going to be at least one expansion, hopefully more than one, but there's probably going to be at least one expansion in play. In order to do this, there is lacking of a battle tower, which I feel a little bit sad about because I kind of enjoy battle tower facilities, especially just like using rental Pokemon. And the competitive ladder, I have yet to actually play. I do want to play it at some point because I do think it'll be enjoyable, but we shall see. I do want to give a quick nod to the music in this game. While music is not always a huge deal for me, I do think most of the music was a little bit weaker in this generation than Sword and Shield, but there were some real big standout themes. The Starburst theme especially, Penny, the Professor fight in Area Zero, probably a big one. Masagoza's town theme, really, really nice. Lavincia is probably my personal favorite. The Wild Battle music is pretty cool, the Academy Ace tournament music's cool, but most of the flops are the regular trainer battles, the gym leader theme, excuse me, and a lot of the room music. Excuse me. There. But yeah, there were some real flops, and some of these music kind of appears in a lot of the game, which kind of sucked. But yeah, music was not the greatest. Obviously, Toby Fox is an amazing composer, and it's kind of interesting that most of the standout pieces he composed. As per usual, but a lot of the other ones were kind of big flops. It kind of sucks that the trainer theme is kind of bad, the general trainer theme, because that piece was actually written by Masuda, so pretty unfortunate. But yeah, generally in conclusion, aside from the terrible performance of the game, and some features that are missing, and some quality of life things that definitely need to be worked on, particularly Terra raids. Those definitely need fixing. Obviously, the performance issues definitely need fixing. This game has some elements that are the best in Pokemon games, but it has some elements that are the worst as well. So, honestly, I would recommend giving this game a go for yourself as well. Obviously, watch other people's reviews as well. Don't just take mine, because I'm one person. There'll be several different people that have played the game that will have different opinions. So yeah, definitely go watch all of those, and if you are going to play the game yourself, or if you have already played the game yourself, let me know down in the comments below what you think about the game. I would love to hear from you, of course. But that's going to be it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, guys, stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.